So welcome back to this edition of the Raising Our Vibration podcast, where we explore higher consciousness through spiritual practice. And today, Stephen and I are going to talk about interbrain synchrony, coherence, and shared experience. And as a launch into this discussion, I have this study called What Binds Us? Interbrain Neural Synchronization and its Implications for Theories of Human Consciousness. So I thought I'd begin today by reading from the abstract of that study. So it says, a growing number of studies in social cognitive neuroscience reveal that phase synchronization similarly appears across brains during meaningful social interaction. Moreover, this interbrain synchronization has been associated with subjective reports of social connectedness, engagement, and cooperativeness, as well as experiences of social cohesion and self-other merging. And the main activity that they cite as supportive of this interbrain synchronization is cooperative activities. So activities where two or more people are engaged in the same activity where they need to cooperate. For example, a pilot and a co-pilot when they are getting ready to take off. This is an activity that requires them both to be working together on the same task at the same time. And they've found so neural synchronization in those types of tasks. So Stephen and I would extend this much more broadly into shared group experiences, such as in our shared group meditations, which happen online. So we're not even in the same room together. We're on Zoom and we're all over the world, but there's an experience that is repeated again and again and again, where after the meditation, people describe their experience in very similar ways. So there's a shared felt experience, shared states of consciousness that happen and are amplified in this group practice. So people are doing these same meditations guided, maybe with a guided MP3 and having an experience, but they do this meditation with a group where we're doing it live, and there's just an amplified experience from that group, say, interaction, even though how does that happen, right? It's beyond space and time. There's some nonlinear connection in consciousness that we would say is proven by these shared experiences. So I know, Stephen, you have another study that you wanted to cite that is working along these same lines, but I think it was with social media interaction.
Yeah, and cooperative learning and similar, and they discovered things similar to what we've discovered in the group, but we're pointing towards cooperative learning. And particularly, Kevin, I wanted to bring your mind and everybody's listening's mind to an opportunity that we discovered when we first meditated together, and that was that when we used a muse, we discovered that our brains had very similar patterns. So when we used the Muse Mind Monitor and we activated our energy, the Muse did a particular type of, or gave a particular kind of pattern, which was a big arc of energy. And then when we deactivated in our practice or deactivated energy, then the Muse and Mind Monitor showed a different pattern, and these tended to correlate with an increase in certain brain waves, and then with a decrease in other brain waves. And Kevin and I were really, if you're interested in looking at this, actually, you can see this in Dr. Cody Rawls' advanced meditators video on his channel, on his YouTube channel, because what we noticed was that Kevin and I had exactly the same arcs to within 60 seconds, right? You know, the moment that we increased our energy, the moment we activated that sympathetic nervous system and really energized this sense of arousal of energy and activating energy, the mind monitor went in a particular direction. So I'll just say it was a big arc of energy. And then the moment that we deactivated that, then the brain patterns went in basically the opposite direction. And it was curious, Kevin, because I know you've had this researched in labs, and I was also part of a science and engineering study in Japan, and they showed the same thing, that there was a big activation and there was an equally big deactivation. And in the research that Kevin's referring to, they speak about this in this social learning, when there was an agreement on something, or a synchrony or a coherence around a particular issue. So they were sharing information. So it was looking at the effects of social media information, that when there was a concordance, or when there was coherence between peers, so they were doing it in pairs, much like Kevin and I did, that there was this really significant activation in the frequency range over a particular period, as opposed to people that disagreed. So this study, which was entitled Elevated Interbrain Coherence Between Subjects with Concordant States, during discussion of particular social issues, it really pointed to the same kind of process that we were going to, especially this was just done with pairs, and Kevin and I were just doing, of course, in pairs, but we recognized that, well, this same feeling could equally be translated into group examples. So the follow-up piece of research that I wanted to mention, and one that I'm a great fan of, was Andrew Newberg's work with groups. So he did a series of studies that he entitled Opening the Heart to Unity, and I thought they were particularly relevant for what we're sharing here. He did it on Sufi groups. So particularly if you, as a youngster, I was part of a Sufi group for quite some time. We did chanting, dancing, or it was just a really beautiful practice. And the Sufism, if you're not so familiar with it, is a mystical branch of Islam that focuses on divine love, unity, and enlightenment. And in the studies that Andrew Newberg did, he looked at groups that were looking at groups. So this is the crucial point, that he was looking at groups, some that were chanting and clapping, like rhythmic jumping, chanting, rhythmic jumping. Well, they do go and jump in a minute. Rhythmic chanting. One with just chanting, and another one that was dancing. And he discovered that those initial activities really deeply stimulate the sympathetic nervous, really stimulate the sympathetic nervous system, and engage all the participants as a group in this sense of wonder. They evoke this sense of ecstasy, arousal, and then when they let go and they stop the activity, they then move into that state of parasympathetic openness, oneness, and surrender. And that's what he spoke to in these studies, about the notions of oneness and surrender in these enlightenment experiences in mystical Islam. And I thought that was particularly interesting, because when he looked inside that, so he did his SPEC studies on the brains of those groups of participants. And so when he got them to do the same thing, to do chanting and body movements. And what he typically does in his studies using the SPEC protocol is he injects them with a radioactive tracer during the end of the practice. So when the participants were in their most, trance-like state, because he was interested in the enlightenment experience. So just bear in mind, he qualifies this saying he wasn't looking at the whole shift of the group, and he's only looking at a particular state at a particular point in time. And he noticed that at that particular point in time, much like he'd noticed in other mystical states, that he'd previously measured the very high activity, the activation states or the arousal of the sympathetic nervous system. But what he noticed when people entered that state of union, which is, again, coming back to what Kevin and I are really speaking to again with our groups and what we've experienced, is that all the Sufi groups showed this dramatic decrease of activity in the frontal lobe, and that they showed a corresponding, they showed lots of really deep, profound experience, sometimes visions, sometimes out-of-body experiences, sometimes just a sense of being profoundly moved by God or by source or by the universe. And then he said he made another fascinating discovery in the scans, and that was that he saw the decrease in the activity in the parietal lobes, so that the sense of oneness and unity gave an openness and a sense of surrender and a sense of really deep, powerful letting go. And this is something that we've discovered with our groups, that there's this incredibly powerful sense of oneness and unity in the groups at the end of our practices. And we typically do the same kind of, the same kind of practices, very highly activated, especially in our LLP, our light, love, and peace practices, very highly activated state, followed by a period of deactivation. So yeah, that's what he found was that, and it's interesting, the other thing he found, Kevin, that I found quite interesting was our light, love, and peace practice over that period is about, I don't know, it'd exceed 30 minutes, probably around 40 minutes, I think, in total. And he discovered that the parietal activity in those intense activities like chanting, drumming, dancing declined after about 40 to 50 minutes, that it required about that degree, for example, of strong activation as a group before they entered into this deactivated parietal activity, or call it the parietal activity declined after about 40 to 50 minutes. And he said that he found that correlated with the studies they'd done on Christian groups meditating, Buddhist groups meditating, and engaged in about those hour-long practices. So I thought that was something else significant in terms of the group, that there seemed to be, in his studies, a period of time that it took most, participants, and he's talking about average participants who'd been in their groups for, a few years, but were not considered advanced, but were just practitioners of that. So I thought in terms of group studies, all that data and information was extremely helpful and points to much the same thing as we've found in our group practices, and that is we're all doing the same thing. So similar to the Sufi chanting or the Buddhists meditating or the Christian groups praying, we're also doing it for a period of time that correlates with the Sufis, the Christians, the Buddhists, the Hindus, which was about 40 to 50 minutes. We're doing it as a group, and we're doing the same thing. So similar, everybody's either praying or meditating with a similar technique, or chanting or dancing, or and we show the similar, increase in activation of, especially of the frontal lobes, and that showed in the Muse and Mind monitor graphs. And then the subsequent deactivation, especially of those parietal lobes, that happens when you enter that state of surrender, and oneness and letting go. And so I did, anyway, just in terms of some lovely, correlations to what we've discovered. I thought those were really beautiful. And they're speaking to that, the heart of unity, that really that's what we're speaking to, the heart of unity, the heart of love, the heart of enlightenment, the heart of coherence and synchrony as a group.
So it really shows the importance of that group activity, right? You're doing something together, and that kind of finding that common ground and having that common experience. I was watching on PBS NewsHour, obviously in politics these days, there's just tremendous division, and people are really dug in on both sides of political issues. And there was this group, I wish I could remember the name of the group. There's many of these groups now that are just sprouting up now, that are focused on finding common ground as a source of unity. And in this one particular study they were highlighting, or this group, this pairing of opposing point of views, what they were doing in this study was they would have one person who was just a real staunch Trump supporter, and with just really dug in on that side, and one person that was a really strong Democrat, liberal on that side of things. And they brought them together and interviewed them separately about each other. So that was their first thing, is they showed the one person a video of the other person talking, and had this one person comment on that person's talking, and with all the judgments and just everything that you see in social media these days, especially, but politics in general. And then they showed the other person a video of this person one talking, and had them comment on that person. Again, just all those stereotypical, judgmental, highly divisive comments. Then they brought them together into the same room, had them sit probably 3 feet apart, facing each other, so very, intimate setting, and they had them share a common experience. And just the one person, they were told from, I guess, from the interviewers, to share a certain type of emotional experience that they had in common. And as the one person you could just see in this video, as the one person was talking about this experience that they had, that the other person could so relate to, just as a human being, right? Just, and vice versa. There was just this common bond and unity formed very quickly. I mean, between people who had very strong biases against each other walking into that room, but just in a very brief interaction where they shared a moment of vulnerability that was just a common human experience, and the other person did, they formed this bond. And they interviewed the people afterwards, and they're like, yeah, I can see this person holds all these different points of view, but they're just a person like me. And I really like this person, right? I just, as a human being, and it was a very brief interaction. It wasn't like they spent weeks together. It was a very short period of time. It didn't take much, right? For people to just let those walls down, let those judgments go, and just have a deeply heartfelt connection with each other. So, I think that just kind of ties into this whole idea of finding common ground in shared felt experiences, something that we're doing in group meditations. But how can we do that? How can we look for more and more ways to do that together? I know a lot of times people have that experience at sporting events. Like, you don't know what the politics of the people sitting next to you are, but you're in there rooting for your team. You're all like, and you're all excited together and you're high-fiving. And I bet if people knew, the politics of the other person, they may have all kinds of judgments or opinions. But since in that environment, nobody knows, that's not a part of it. It's just about having this shared experience. How can we do that more in our culture and consciously do that, where we get together with people who have different points of view, radically different points of view, and share a common experience? And that's what's going to change our consciousness and change our world.
I so agree, Kevin. I so deeply agree. I don't know whether it was this group, but PBS did do a story with Braver Angels, which is
they were one of the groups. Yeah.
They uniting red and blue Americans in this alliance to depolarize America. I know they've so that could be one of them.
Right? Yeah, that was definitely one of the ones they mentioned.
How it's curious for me because I'm in Japan, of course, and in Japan there is the culture is so very different, than the US, and in that sense, whenever I go to groups, there is a very clear, don't talk about politics kind of unspoken thing that because most people, I think in Japan, they don't really care about politics. I could say I've never been to, one where people are polarized like that in that sense, because they're just not really that interested. It's quite interesting. And as a result, I think it's shown a little bit in the, current climate that exists in Japan, because there's no distinction between whether you're vaccinated, unvaccinated, what side of the political fence you're on, or anything like that at the moment. People are just aware that it's a bit like any of the disasters or issues that Japan faces. They tend to face it all together. So there's really not that, there's not that polarization that exists in the US. And I'm really coming back to what we're talking about with group unity. I'm really present to the fact that when you hold strong opinions, just as you were saying, you tend to have a really strongly identified sense of self, because that's what happens when you hold on to opinions. You kind of reinforce the sense of self, and that again, just reflecting on Andrew Newberg's research, he said the area responsible for constructing and maintaining our self-image is that parietal lobe. When the activity in that area decreases, then there's not such a strong sense of self, which is why it's often connected with a sense of losing a sense of self. And a sudden decrease, he explained that sudden decrease is often why spiritual practitioners say that their sense of self, their ego actually disappears, which seems to be, again, connected to our talk, seems to be strongly related to Eastern philosophy. And it may be why the Japanese population has adopted, because I'm actually very interested in populations at the moment, because I'm part of a very Eastern tradition here, and noticing quite significantly different features to how the pandemic has been approached compared to, say, Austria or even the US or Australia and lots of other, where there's been a strong polarization. So it's it's very so that part is kind of interesting when you tie it in, that when that sense of self, and so not holding on to opinions and views actually drops away completely, then all that remains at that point, as we've discovered in our groups, is the object of your contemplation, which is ultimately unity with, which we often encourage, unity with whatever, God, Allah, source, the light, non-dual aware, whatever your unity is, merging with the universe, merging with pure awareness or consciousness, that you get this this felt sensation as a group that we've come that much closer to it. And I'm so, it's speaking to a lot of the practices that we do over time, that we notice with our groups, that by about the 7th or 8th week, that unity consciousness, especially as a group, that kind of beingness that really touches both inner and outer peace, seems to have happened because people have felt that much more closely, intimately connected, not just with the practice, but with everybody. Because ultimately it is everything and everyone that we're feeling unity with, and that love, that sense of love, that really deep unity is what bursts out from people's hearts.
Right, and it's naturally present. It's like when you deactivate the conceptual mind and the narrative self, and through these practices, or I was watching Shinzen Young and Dr. Jay Sanguinetti talk about how they are stimulating, or actually not stimulating, but they're stimulating the posterior part of the posterior cingulate cortex, where the default mode network, the sense of self, seems to be a hub for that. So they're sending a signal in there that is disrupting the activity there. And when that activity shuts down, there's just a natural openness and equanimity that's present. It's kind of like that is our natural state of being when we get out of the nonstop monkey mind and conceptualization, which comes with judgment and identification and so on. When that is quieted, even for a few moments, there is just naturally present this openness and this sense of connection and this sense of equanimity. And that's what we're doing in meditation, right? Is using certain techniques to quiet the mind and calm the emotions, relax the body, so that natural state of awareness shines forth. And it's there all the time. It's there in everyone, so to speak, as kind of the ground of who we are, yet it's covered over with all these layers of mental busyness and judgments and identifications. And so when we can engage in a practice together where we activate that felt sensory experience and quiet the mind, we simply rest as that open awareness, and we feel that connection with each other, this natural and always there.
Yeah, Kevin, your beautiful comments reminded me of they in Islam, I think it's said there is no God but God. And from a neuroscientific point of view, what you just said could be that there's no awareness but awareness. And or universally, there's no love but love. It's really
it's simply present and ever present. Yes,
exactly.
Thank you, Stephen, for this
thank you,
beautiful
Kevin.
discussion and really interesting research. It's great to see research being done on these topics, right?
Right. Especially this interbrain synchrony, that there's a lot being done on individual meditation and individual meditative states. But as we realize how important unity is for our planet, the more research that can be done on interbrain and unity and synchrony and coherence as a planet, I think that's where the real secret to our planet's healing lies.
That's the secret sauce, right? Yeah. If we put half as much time and energy into that direction, we would be living in a whole different consciousness and a whole different world.
Exactly. Beautiful, Kevin.
Thank you, Stephen. And thank you all for listening. And we will see you again in the same time, the same place on the Raising Our Vibration podcast next week. Bye for now.